amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
And hello and welcome, listeners. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Fiona Stager, OAM, who won her Order of Australia as part of the King's Birthday Honours for her service to literature as a bookseller. Fiona is co-owner of 3 wonderful inspirational bookshops, Avid Reader, Where the Wild Things Are in the West End, and Riverbend in Balloomba. Walking inside any of those bookstores, as I have in 2 of them, is an amazing experience, and you never want to leave. So, welcome, Fiona.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Rosemary.
I believe you were brought up on a sugar farm in far north Queensland. So do tell us, how have you ended up being such a force in the wonderful world of books, not just here in Brisbane, but nationally? And when did you open your first bookstore? Well, we can come to that after you've answered the first question.
I grew up on a cane farm just outside of Babinda, which is south of Cairns, wettest place in Australia. So a lot of time for reading. Yeah. And I was always a big reader. I loved it. I loved everything. I was very eclectic. I read whatever was lying around, whether it was war comics at the beach hut or, James Michener and Catherine Cookson and all that historical fiction I just devoured. And I also like small business, which is part of running a bookshop. But yes, I was a big reader. My family encouraged me to read, and I had a couple of good librarians.
And then you left Babinda and you went to university in Townsville. Is that right? Yes.
I did. I did a couple of years of university there. I was a very bad student. I loved reading, loved doing all the research, didn't really like to write assignments, Rosemary. So I left uni.
But you were one of few young people in that area to go to university at that time.
Yes.
So were you dreadfully homesick as well? Or,
not so much homesick. It was... most of my friends left school in grade 10. If they did get a job, it was in the local town. A lot of them left and got married or had children. So there was only a few of us who went to grade 11 and 12.
Right.
So not many of us went to university. And, I think I was probably just a little bit out of my depth.
And then you came down to Brisbane. And I believe you worked as a waitress in a couple of Italian restaurants. And so how did you find Brisbane after leaving Babinda? Then Townsville, of course. Yeah.
Look, I loved West End. So I always say I came to West End and not so much Brisbane. Yeah. And what I loved about West End, it was very multicultural, like the small country town I grew up in. You could easily and quickly know all the shopkeepers. And it felt like a small country town, of course, with all the advantages of a city.
Yes.
Yeah, so
it's changed a little bit now, hasn't it?
It has
over the years?
changed, yes. And some of those changes are okay. But yes, there's still a nice little heart to West End.
It does. It has a lovely, well, I wouldn't say country feel, but it's got a lovely friendly feel, hasn't it? Walking around there the other day, I felt very much as though it was a lovely, friendly environment. Even that huge new development that's gone on just down the road from you.
Yes. So that's some of the changes, and there's certainly a lot more people living in the area, which is good. Except there probably hasn't been the planning that has needed to be done in terms of public transport. I'm a big advocate of public transport. I'm a big advocate of walking, and I think that was the other thing I loved about West End. You could walk everywhere, and I've always been a big walker, and I really believe in the right for people to be able to walk and have access to everything.
Terrific. And why did you suddenly decide that you'd open a bookstore there? Was there there was one already there, or did you totally start it from scratch?
I started working in a small second-hand bookshop. That was Emma's bookshop. And then I bought into that. So I was co-owner of that second-hand bookshop. I did that through my 20s. And I knew that there was a demand for new books in the area. I knew that my customers were big readers and big book buyers. And also I was very driven by events. I'd been very much inspired by Glee Books in Sydney.
Right.
And they have and still do have an extraordinary events program. So I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I sold my share in the second-hand bookshop, and then a couple of us opened Avid Reader, and then we did that in 1997. And from the very first get-go, we were very events-driven. I knew I wanted to bring people together to talk about ideas.
And then you've got Where the Wild Things Are next door. And I believe that once you sort of heard that name, you thought there's got to be a bookshop.
That's right. So that was my husband's idea, and I just loved it. I thought, oh, we have to do it now. We also needed a receivables area, and we needed somewhere to store extra stock. And then when the place came up next to us, we went, oh, well, that's perfect because we can use the back half of it for events and receivables and all the boring bits of running a bookshop. And the advantage was that we got this beautiful children's bookshop at the front. We opened that 9 years ago. I always say I got a children's bookshop for my 50th birthday.
Oh,
because we opened pretty much on my 50th birthday.
Oh, how lovely. And what a great spot for children to be able to come in and lose themselves, because, I mean, I noticed that you've got all sorts of wonderful titles there, and even sort of singers' lives and film stars' lives sort of done as children might like to read it.
Yes, it's been the growth in children's books has been extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that we thought we would turn it into a children's bookshop. At one stage I wanted to do a cookbook and travel bookshop because that's my other passion, is cooking and travelling. But then when we looked at our sales figures in Avid, it was children's books. It was a huge growth in a very small section. And at the same time, there'd been a boom in Australian children's books. And just generally over the last 20 years, the calibre of children's writing has really gone through the roof. Beautiful non-fiction, great Australian writing. And kids love it. And we designed it so kids could feel comfortable there. And children so respect the place, Rosemary. It's really interesting. If you design something for children, they respond and, they just love it.
Oh, how lovely. And it gets them off their phones. And a lot of children, I noticed, are going back to reading books. I mean, a lot's still on their phones all the time, but they are actually picking up a book.
They are, and they like the physical book.
Yes.
They really do. We do a lot of book fairs, and children love the feel of books.
Yes.
And I think it's easier on their eyes. All the studies show that you remember things better when you're reading a physical book. And also audio. Audio is huge at the moment as well. But, kids really... And kids are also collectors, so they like to collect things.
And come back to it time and time again.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I noticed actually even older children, because I've got 5 grandchildren and they range in age from 18 to 25, but they've started now picking up real books where they went through a stage that they weren't reading. But it's interesting, whereas because I spend a lot of time living on a boat, I do a lot of my reading on a Kindle or an iPad, mainly because when we were overseas it was difficult to carry a suitcase full of books.
Yes.
But particularly my granddaughter, I noticed, would much prefer to pick up a real book. So I now scrounge around looking for ones for her.
That's great. And I think it's the same thing. It's easier on the eyes, and they're off their phone, because if you're on a device, you stay on the device, so then you can get distracted. But if you've got the physical book in any form, you stay with it. You stay with the story. Social media has been huge. Book Talk is huge.
Yes.
On TikTok, Instagram, all of that is actually encouraging, especially young women, to read physical books.
But you haven't got just physical books, and our readers, listeners particularly, would be interested in that many bookshops, including yours now, have a great range of audiobooks. And if you haven't actually got them in the store, you can order them. But you have got quite a few in there, haven't you?
Yes, and we do. And we also have a partnership with Libro.fm, and that means that people can buy audiobooks. They can choose their local bookshop where they buy it from, and then we get a percentage of those sales.
It's a really growing industry.
It really is.
I think my husband actually listens more to audiobooks now than he does reading them, whereas I love to listen to them when I am supposedly out doing my 10,000 steps that don't end up being 10,000 steps. And I love to listen to an audiobook when I'm doing that. It passes the time a bit.
Yes, we've got staff, and they use all the different formats. So they'll read on device, they'll read their physical book, and then they listen to audio. Right. And they choose different genres for those 3 different activities.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so they'll read non-fiction in paper form, they'll read like romantasy on a device, and then they'll listen to another, like they might listen to crime when
Yes.
they're out walking or something like that. So, yeah, audiobooks has been a huge increase, which is great. It's fabulous.
Oh, look, it is. And what I think is fabulous is that so many now of authors, particularly those that are writing memoirs or they're, any sort of life story, read it themselves. Like we had Bonnie Hancock on last week, who kayaked around Australia. Now, she's published a book and she's reading it all herself. I think a lot of it started when Barack Obama started reading did read his own book, and Michelle Obama reading their own book. But it's terrific, isn't it, to hear the author's voice?
Yeah, I think that makes it even more special because
Yes.
you really feel like they're speaking to you, and that's such an intimate, very special relationship.
Exactly. But now, Fiona, I looked at all the books that you have in your bookshop. How on earth do you choose which ones to have and which ones not to have? It's a huge job.
It is. We have a buyer, Sarah Deasy. She's been with me for about 10 years now, and she's got a really great eye, and then I also help with the buying as well. And I think we're always looking, we're always thinking about what our customers would like. When I first started, I was the buyer and I would think, oh, so-and-so would like this book, I'll order one for them. And even if they didn't buy it, someone like them did.
Yes.
So that was one of the ways that we use. Also, our customers order amazing books, so I'll go, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll get extra ones of those. And then the publishers send reps to us,
Right.
and they come in once a month and they show us the titles, and then they'll have information about previous sales that we've done of those books,
Yes.
and then media plans and things like that. So that helps as well.
And all very important. But do you mostly take books from publishers, or do you take independent ones that have published their own books? How do they get a book into you? If somebody out there has written a book that they have published themselves, how do they possibly get that into a bookstore?
That's probably the hardest thing to do. And we do take self-published works. Sarah works closely with self-publishers. Mostly we take non-fiction. We take a little bit of fiction, but not very much. And whenever I'm speaking to self-published authors, I always say, you've done all the hard work of writing the book, getting it published, but now the really hard work starts, and that's distribution, getting it to
The reader.
Getting it to the reader, and it's hard and it's expensive for us to have self-published books on our shelves, and
You can't have them there forever.
No.
So what is your? I think it's about a 3-monthly, isn't it, turnaround of books that if they're not selling within that 3 months, you've got to make the really hard decision of sending it back.
That's right, and that's what we do. It's called sale or return.
Right.
And so we send it back to the publisher or the author, and for the publisher, we'll then get credit back.
Yes.
So it's one of the few industries that runs like this, and that's because the risk is then shared.
Yes.
So if we only bought everything firm sale, we would take very little.
Right.
So this is a way for us to share the risk between the publisher
Yes.
and the bookseller.
Which is terrific. Just going back to independent publishers, I remember reading a story years ago about the wonderfully successful author Matthew Riley, and he had a friend who owned a bookshop, and he wrote this first book, and he got his friend to put it in the front window, and lo and behold, I think it was Kate Patterson from Pan Macmillan walked past and picked it up and read it. And, well, the rest is history, isn't it?
It is quite extraordinary,
Yes.
quite extraordinary. And there's been a few people like that. I think maybe even The Alchemist was self-published,
Yeah.
Coelho's book many years ago. So there have been some success stories.
Absolutely. You're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Fiona Stager, the proprietor of 3 amazing bookshops here in Brisbane and a joy amongst readers of all ages. Have you discovered an author? I know you've got a wonderful room upstairs where authors or would-be authors can come and write. Now, One of my very, very favourite bookshops in the entire world is Shakespeare and Co. in Paris, where I think Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all of those used to hang out and possibly doing their writing. But upstairs in your writer's room, have you produced a brilliant best-selling novelist or writer of any sort?
Yes, we have. So Melissa Lukashenko, who wrote Eden Glassy, she wrote up there. She wrote Mullumbimby, so she's won lots of awards, and she spent a couple of years up there writing.
Oh, how terrific. And you have lots of launches there and tremendous amount of opportunities for an author to be able to get their book out there. And your launches, I think, are sort of known all around Brisbane. So, yes.
And because I've always thought people remember a party and not
Yes.
an ad in the paper. So I always try and make launches a celebration for the author. They've put a lot of hard work into it. So I really like to celebrate. It's a very important milestone. If you've done all of that work, you've committed, you've got that book published, then it should be celebrated. I think probably one of our most famous authors that we had in the back courtyard was Trent Dalton. So
Right, yes.
he was the first event we did with him. There was like 80 or 90 people. It was packed.
Yes.
And then, of course,
And that was before he was really well known.
Yes, that was before everybody knew what Boy Swallows Universe was going to do. So then his next book, I think we had 1,200 people.
Oh.
And then the next book was like 1,300. And then the next book was 2,000 people at his last event. So, of course, we went to the Piazza for that. But
I was going to say, I was wondering where you would...
Yeah, that's an example of an author who's really gone through the roof.
Exactly, yes. Years ago when Kindle did come in, everybody sort of said, well, that's it, that's the end of bookstores. But it wasn't, was it? But did you find it difficult at that time? Or
It was certainly challenging, and so that's when we really looked at our events program, because I kind of thought nothing can quite replicate. You can't really get your Kindle signed, basically. So we really promoted and expanded our events program. And then, of course, there's been a return to the book.
Yes, exactly.
And even if people are reading both forms, sometimes they'll read something on their device, but then they'll want the real hard copy of it.
Exactly, yeah.
Or people are travelling like you, but you still want a physical book as well. And so certainly sales of books have decreased in terms of Kindles and things like that.
Well, there's so much competition. There's Netflix and there's, everything you can sort of watch on television. But there's also now the online bookstores. Now, we've read recently, of course, that Booktopia was closing, but I believe they've now been bought by somebody else, so they're up and running again. But you've got Amazon and you've got all of those. How do they affect your sales?
We sell a lot online. We've got a very strong online market, and I think our customers who support us will buy from us online, and we're price competitive. We have signed copies. So most independent booksellers have an online presence, and I think people think it's just Booktopia or those places, but you can easily shop online with your local independent bookshop.
Well, which is terrific. You just need to log in on the web page, which I'll give people afterwards, and they can get it delivered to their front door.
Exactly.
Now, the pandemic was obviously a huge time for book readers. And were you able to stay open during that period of time? I presume...
Yes, there were various iterations where we were trading from the shop. There was one time where we just closed completely because the advice from the medical officials were not to encourage people to come out at all. I do remember when we first when the pandemic was declared, when we realised we were going to go into lockdown, senior management at Avid came together and we went, oh, okay, this is it. I was thinking we were going to lose everything. I was thinking, we're going to have to take boarders in at our house. It was the worry was intense. So we looked at our staff and looked at, those ones who had a mortgage, those ones who were the main providers for their families. And we said, okay, we're going to keep all of those people on, And then people who lived at home with their parents and things like that, we thought, oh, well, their parents are going to
Yes.
be there. But in fact, what happened was that we needed more people because people not only turned to books and jigsaw puzzles during the pandemic, they turned to their local bookshop. And people went out of their way to support us. And yes, and so rather than having to put people off, we had to put people on, which was a good thing to be able to do. And then we were one of the few bookshops who did Zoom events. So we had the first Zoom literary event in Australia.
Yes.
And then we really drove that. We did a lot. And we would encourage people to buy from their local bookshop, so people could Zoom in from all around Australia, all around the world.
Yes.
And then we would say, thank you for joining us. Make sure you buy a copy of the book from your local bookshop. And that's because my book-selling colleagues in places like Melbourne and Adelaide, they weren't able to do what we could do. Like they weren't able to get to their shops while I could walk to work, and things like that. So that was our contribution to the industry.
Oh, terrific. And now you've got a section out the front called, for the remainders, I think it is. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's my favourite section of the bookshop, Rosemary. Funny you should ask that. So what happens is, as we're talking about sale or return, so sometimes booksellers send the books back to the publishers. The publishers have too many of a particular book.
Yes.
And so they, rather than pulping them, they will remainder them. So they go to this particular company that we deal with in Melbourne.
Right.
And then this company also, they buy excess stock from publishers all around the world.
Yes.
So, so we can get them at a good price and pass that good price on to our readers.
Which is terrific. So if you're walking down the street there, you can just stop, as I did, and spend quite a bit of time just mulling through the books that are out there, and I'm sure you're going to find something that you love, and at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, and that's what we try to do, is to be price competitive against some of our other competitors. And also, they're the books that we haven't even come into Australia, so there's some really interesting titles.
Yes.
Books also go from hardback to paperback, or hardback to trade paperback to paperback. There's a whole lot of different formats.
Yes.
And so they sell off the hardbacks when the new format comes in. And, so we'll get those hardbacks at a good price.
I believe Prince Harry has even put his out in paperback now.
Yes.
And he hasn't changed anything, supposedly.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see. Now, you run book clubs as well, don't you? Could you tell us more about that, Fiona?
Yes, we've got a whole lot of book clubs for any and all interests. And that was once again one of those things that I loved, was bringing people together. I think there's something very special about, you read a book alone, but then you come together and you can share your thoughts. And everybody brings something different to the text. So you and I could read the same book, but because our life experiences are really quite different, then we interpret that book differently. We read different things into it. So I love bringing people together to talk about that. All our book clubs are open, so whoever you are, you can come.
To your bookstore, yes? And you hold them out the back? Or
we hold them out the back.
Right.
So you buy the book from us, and then you come together. And I really like it that you don't know who you're sitting next to.
Exactly.
So it's because often book clubs are run by a group of friends.
Yes.
And but this way, I don't know, I think there's something very special about it. I see book clubs as a way to really increase empathy, because you have to sit and listen to somebody else.
Yes.
You can disagree with them, which is fine, but you have to do that in a very respectful way. And I think we learn a lot by listening to what other people think of a book. Yeah, I think they're agencies to change the world quietly.
Exactly. And as you say, I mean, how often does somebody give you a book and said, I loved it, and then you're halfway through and you think, oh gosh, I can't read it, or the other way around. Somebody says, I don't like it, and then so you get everybody's point of view. But do you ever have authors discuss the book in front of the author?
Yes, we've done that quite a few times now, which can be a little bit challenging for the authors.
Oh,
because I've got some very honest members in my book club, or outspoken members, and but I think Yeah.
I can reiterate that I have published through HarperCollins, published a novel, and was invited to a book club as they discussed it. I think it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done in my life.
I can imagine.
Because certainly, why did you write that particular thing or whatever? And it's frightening, yes, for the author. Yes,
I can imagine. But also, it's great for the reader because then we can talk about the ending.
Yes.
Because often, if you go to an author event at a festival or something like that, not everybody has read the book, so you can't talk about the ending. But in a book club, you can, and I think, readers love that. They love being able to ask authors why, how, when, all of that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yes. So have you had any Harry Potters or what's the other one, of course, 50 Shades of Grey? Or actually there's an author now at the moment called Colleen Hoover, which seems to be on the top of the best-selling list of every newspaper you look in. But have you had any huge sales of books that you haven't been able to keep up with?
Yes, certainly Trent Dalton would be our best-selling author of all time.
Yes.
We certainly sold a lot of 50 Shades of Grey. We sold a lot of Harry Potter, of course. We sold a lot of colouring in books when they were the big thing. We sold a lot of Shannon Lush's book on cleaning when that was huge. It's always interesting when we go through these different phases. So romantasy is our next biggest genre, so romance meets fantasy.
Right.
And that is just going through the roof. There are a few authors there.
Yes.
Colleen Hoover, because of Book Talk and young people driving those sales.
Right.
She's a really interesting example because she was pretty much a mid-list author. So she's still being published by a major publishing house, but her sales were, I imagine, modest would be. And then she got picked up by a few readers, word of mouth, social media. And I think in 1 year they republished her book 26 times in the US because they couldn't keep up with the demand for it.
Isn't it extraordinary? And sometimes looking at the bestseller list, she's got 4 different titles on there. It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm really interested in that tipping point, what makes an author tip over into this stratosphere in terms of sales. There is another cookbook that we're doing very well with, Recipe Tin Eats.
Right.
And that came out a couple of years ago. And interestingly enough, it was Nagi is her first name, and she did all of it on the website. And I was certainly cooking with her stuff during the pandemic. And then the book came out, and I thought, interesting that they turn it into a book because she's so huge online. Will anybody actually buy the book? It was the bestseller that year. It continued to be the bestseller next year, the following year. So I think well over 500,000 copies of her cookbook has sold to date and still continuing to sell.
There's a fair bit of luck in it, isn't it, too? If somebody like Oprah Winfrey or whatever picks it up and, you're up and away, aren't
Absolutely.
you? Or Leon Moriarty, or if Nicole Kidman or Reese Witherspoon want to make a movie, you've been...
Exactly, Rosemary, yes. So much of it is chance, a lot like life, really. And then the interesting thing with things like Netflix and a lot of social media, that drives people to buy a book. So books that have been turned into films on TV, George R.R. Martin, we're selling so many of his books. Sourdough, people making sourdough.
Right.
Podcasts, authors who are on podcasts, authors with podcasts, that generates a lot of sales as well.
Incredible. So now if you'd like to visit any of Fiona's bookstores, there's Riverbend and Where the Wild Things Are, that they're located in the West End, where you can also grab a delicious lunch nearby. There's lots of restaurants and whatever there, as I discovered. And Riverbend is in Bulimba. Or you can ring, can I give your phone number out?
Certainly.
073846 3422 and speak to someone who can help you find that particular book, because a lot of Fiona's staff are actually writers themselves, so and they don't always refer you to their own books. They can tell you about others. And there's a website, of course, that you can get on www.avidreader.com.au, and you're sure to be able to find an audiobook or a hard copy book that will hopefully keep you entertained for hours. So Fiona Stager, thank you very, very much for being our guest today.
It's been a real pleasure, Rosemary. Thank you for having me.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.